Well, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today we are going to be having a webinar on preparing a winning scientific poster. And we are very happy to have Dr. Ella August and Clara Schreimer who are going to be presenting on this topic. Many of you may have met them before during workshops for writing manuscripts. Ella is assistant professor in School of Public Health and Epidemiology and comes from a background in as a research investigator and also in medical writing and brings those skills to U of M CERT. And Clara is the editor for the PREPS program that has been developed for pre-publication support services to help investigators in low and middle income countries advance their manuscripts to have them ready for publication. And so today they're going to help with developing winning posters, and we have timed this to try to help those who are preparing posters for the CERT conference that's coming up, but also to really help anybody who's going to have a poster coming up in the future. So we welcome you and thank you so much for doing this webinar today.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Yolanda. I'll say, I guess I shouldn't say good morning to my colleagues in Ethiopia and Rwanda. I should say good evening. It's nice to have you with us. I am going to attempt to share my screen so that we prepared some basic PowerPoint slides, and we're happy to share those out as soon as we're done here. So let me just try to do this. And can you see our slides now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started? So today, this evening, the purpose of this webinar is really to provide instructions for creating a scientific poster. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, Pre-Publication Support Service, also known as PREPS, we will provide a quick introduction. So we'll start with some brief introductions and a brief overview of PREPS. I'm going to just say a few words about knowing your audience and specifically in thinking about this conference that's coming up April 4th and 5th in Addis. We'll go through the components that should be included in a scientific poster. Excuse me. And then I'll say a little bit about qualities that make a good scientific poster, including the flow of the poster, including enough white space, text density, color scheme, and contrast. And I'll talk a little bit about including plenty of visuals. And I'll also let you know where you can find a template to create a scientific poster that incorporates many of these elements already. So why don't, I think that Yolanda has done a very elegant job of introducing us already. I think I probably look a little bit better in this photo than I do now because it's 8 in the morning. So as Yolanda mentioned, I'm Ella August, and I run the scientific publishing workshops for CERT. And I'll let you introduce yourself again.
Yes, I'm Clara Schreimer. I work with PREPS as the assistant editor. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Michigan School of Public Health in the Department of Epidemiology.
Now, I think we have just a few people with us this evening from Addis and also from Rwanda. If you wouldn't mind, please just introduce yourself. And why don't we start with our Rwandan colleague? Is it Diomed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not sure that was completely clear. Maybe the connection is a little bit not perfect. But I know that you are with us from Rwanda. And our colleagues from Ethiopia, do we have 2 from Addis?
Almaz, go ahead. Almaz. Hello?
It could be that the microphones are muted or perhaps...
No, actually, I muted them, so... Okay, how about Bakana? Hello?
Okay, well, if you're able to jump in at some point and just say hello, we'd love to hear your voice. But we know that you're with us, and we're glad that you were able to join us. So we can just go ahead and move on. So I wanted to just start briefly with an overview of PREP. Some of you may be familiar with PREP already. I've done a couple trainings now in Addis. So the training starts with a workshop, in-person workshop, and I'll be conducting another workshop in Addis at the end of this month, beginning of April. After the workshop, the participants will have a chance to revise their manuscripts based on what they've learned and submit the updated manuscript to PREP. And we send the manuscripts out to 2 peer reviewers. And after receiving feedback from the peer reviewers, the authors will have a chance to revise and resubmit as many times as they need to get the manuscript into shape. Once the manuscript is, kind of at the point where it's totally ready for submission to a journal, a peer-reviewed journal, we'll send it to some copy editors that we have on staff at PREP. And then we'll help with a cover letter, any other final details that are needed. And then at that point, the authors will be ready to submit their paper to a peer-reviewed journal. We also provide coaching for posters and oral presentations, which is what we're doing here this morning. So I wanted to just say a few words about knowing your audience before we get into the nuts and bolts of preparing a scientific poster. So the reason why you should really think about your audience is because it's going to impact the type and amount of background you give so that people will really understand your project and your research that you're presenting on your poster. The amount of technical detail you provide on your posters will really depend on your audience and their knowledge. Using jargon is totally fine as long as your audience will understand that jargon and really be on the same page with the language that you're using. And finally, your applications of your research need to feel relevant to the people who are looking at your poster. So I think that I have some sense of the audience for the conference, but I wonder if I think Yolanda and Daniel and Berhanu have been organizing the conference. Could you just say a few words about who the audience is for this conference?
Go ahead.
Dan would actually have a better idea. Go ahead.
So the audience that we have registered are, I would say, 80% from Ethiopia, which means that we do have 20%, perhaps, maybe a little bit less, but from other countries around Africa, and a few from outside of Africa, and then a contingent from the University of Michigan. There are many practitioners, there are many doctors and nurses and midwives who have registered, who want to be a part of it. There are academics, but everybody is very focused, and their comments have been very focused around the themes of abortion, safe abortion care, contraception, family planning, counseling, stigma. All of these big issues that we've sort of signaled are important, people have reacted to. And so it's a focused crowd that's interested in learning about research, learning about best practice. That's the feedback that we've gotten so far.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I think the more focused and knowledgeable and narrow your audience is, the easier it is in some ways for the people who are presenting the information, because they can really dig deep and really talk deeply about the issues that they're addressing, and they don't have to spend a lot of time really getting people up to speed on the background and the context of the research. So I see that as a real strength of this conference. So now I'm going to, with that in mind, turn it over to Clara, who will cover the basic components of a scientific poster. Take it away.
Yes, hi everyone. So I'll take you through the basic components of a scientific poster right now. So the main components of a scientific poster are the title, the authors, author affiliations, logos, introduction, methods, results, discussion, and acknowledgement. So I will briefly explain each of the following 9 components and give you an example with this poster on the slide. So titles should be descriptive and interesting. Upon reading your title, an individual from your audience should be able to have a good sense of what your presentation will be about. So think about the who, the what, the when, the where, and they should be very descriptive. So I like this title quite a bit. Early Parenthood and its link with cardiovascular disease risk factors, a preliminary study of Chilean young adults, because it does give those basic answers to the who, the what, the where, and the when, and the why is in the scientific poster, really.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, please.
I have a question for the organizers of the conference. Will these titles be listed in some kind of program or some other material?
Yeah, we'll have a program that would actually include all the titles of the posters, yes, with the authors.
Okay, so again, I think, go ahead, Daniel, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, and we'll have attendees, the abstracts will be online, and attendees will have a USB drive with all of the abstracts on them as well.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, that sounds great. It sounds to me like the title can serve as an invitation for people to come and visit your poster. If someone sees the title listed in the program and it looks interesting, it might motivate someone to come and actually take a look at your poster in person.
Yes, that's a great point. So here's the title. Author names and affiliations should be placed at the top of the poster. You see on this particular poster, the author names and affiliations are circled now, and they're very clear. There's a use of superscripts to show who belongs to which university or academic institution within the list of author names. Logos visually communicate your collaborations and attract audience members to your poster. So some logos are circled, and you want to make sure that you're very thorough when you choose your logos, that they represent all of your collaborators, so that no one is left out. So the introduction and background often appear in the top left of the poster. This provides context, this section. And as Ella was mentioning, the amount and type of context that you provide in your background really does depend on your audience. So you should be mindful of not repeating information that's very basic to them or becoming too technical too quickly. So the context, I think, is right here in this poster, that metabolic syndrome represents a set of cardiovascular disease risk factors that typically occur together. And there's great visuals throughout this background section. The background should describe the problem. So a paucity of research studies in this particular field necessitate this particular study. And the research objective should be clearly laid out. I actually really there are some artistic flair that you can imbue this poster with. So I really like how the objective is set apart from the rest of the background. I think it makes for easy skimming for your audience member, but it's okay to incorporate your objective within a normal background section also. So the next component is the method section. So the method should clearly state your data sets or your sample that are used. So that's right here. I like how the author of this poster or the creator of this poster made subject headings so that study sample is easy to locate within the method section. Measurement should be mentioned, and there's actually a heading here that says measures to orient the audience member, and then the analysis should be described. And just as with the other headings, this too gets a heading. I think that this is a quite well-organized method section.
Agreed.
So the results are the next component. The results, the figures, tables, or other visuals, it really depends on the scope of your research project. I've seen data mapping displayed on actual geographic maps. It really just depends on what your project is about. But I like that these figures and tables have captions that explain what they're about and descriptive titles. I think that they have, Dr. Ella will go on to describe what makes an effective visual, and one thing is contrast. So I think that the contrast and color scheme are really great within these figures and tables.
May I jump in and say
Yes.
something? A few things occurred to me as I look at this slide to point out. One thing is that it's not necessary to number your tables and figures in your poster. It's fine if you want to do that, but you don't have to. The most important thing is providing a descriptive caption so that people can understand what's being shown in the figure. I also want to point out, and I'll talk a little bit more about color and contrast in a moment, but it looks like if you are looking at figure 1 here in the top left part of the slide, you could see 3 shades of this kind of bluish color. There's the lightest shade, the medium shade, and the dark shade. When you're showing something, progression from low to high, it makes a lot of sense to use the lightest shade for the lowest value and then progressively darker shades for progressively higher values. Your eye naturally translates those colors into low to high progression of values. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that for now.
Great. So stay tuned for more information on visual. The next component of a scientific poster is the discussion or conclusion section. As with the introduction, where the objectives can be set apart from the rest of the background, so too can different components of the conclusion. You can decide how you want to organize your headings. I guess that's my point. So the conclusion always has a summary of the findings, your main research findings. So here we can see from adolescence to early adulthood, and these 3 bullet points represent the findings of this study. The interpretation of these findings, just briefly, the authors of this poster chose to comment that these the findings of their research project support or are in line with the previous research relating to these this area of study. That seems optional to me, depending on exactly the scope of your project, but it could be very helpful for your audience, depending on the project scope. Applications of this research. I thought Dr. Ella made a really excellent point earlier that the applications of your research should really be tailored based on your audience. So I'd like to reiterate that point, that you need to make sure that you're framing things in a way that's really relevant to your audience. So in this conference that we're describing upcoming, those would be practitioners or clinicians. So maybe you would focus on making your applications clinically relevant or something along those lines.
Yeah, and let me just jump in here again. I typically in a workshop when I'm talking about scientific communication, either through an oral presentation or a poster presentation, I like to say it's a good practice to tell your audience what you're going to tell them. Tell them. And then tell them what you've told them. That is, set up, and we did it in this presentation. We started with an overview. Okay, this is what we're going to tell you. And then there's the main body of the presentation. This is where we tell you. And then in the conclusion, you should be very clear about what your main points are. What are the main takeaways from your research? And those should be really clearly articulated in the conclusion section as a kind of a wrap-up to help people gel the information.
Mm-hmm. Great point. So the only other component of the conclusion, I guess, that I'd like to highlight is next steps, or sometimes this is labeled future directions, as in this poster. Like I said, you can decide how exactly you want to label those. That's some artistic license that you have. I like how this author chose to separate the future directions from the conclusions. I think that was probably a really appropriate choice based on the conference that he was presenting at. So those are the next. So the last section that I'd like to acknowledge is the acknowledgments. And those are so important. We just cannot stress this enough. It's important to acknowledge your collaborators and mentors who have partnered with you and supported you throughout the research process. That's done here in the first bullet point. And then also to acknowledge funding agencies. That's often a requisite of your funding, but it's also just a very respectful practice. And that's here. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Ella for qualities of good scientific posters.
Okay. And Berhanu, are you taking monitoring the chat? I wasn't sure, or somebody over there. If anything comes up, we have our screen totally occupied with the PowerPoint presentation. So if any questions come up, okay, just feel free to jump in and let us know, or anybody. I guess you have, if your audio is working, feel free to jump in and ask questions as we go along.
Okay.
Okay. So imagine when you're thinking about putting your poster together, imagine your poster in all its glory, set up at the conference, and someone standing in front of it. And imagine how that interaction will go. Someone will walk up. What you're going to need to do is greet them and then give them an overview of your poster, kind of verbally talk them through. Basically, I would say no more than a 2-minute sort of overview of the importance of your research or the basic idea of your research. But also when you're thinking of that person walking up and looking at your poster, they're not going to stand and read every single word of your poster. The poster should really be designed for someone who walks up, and it's going to, I think Clara said it earlier, to sort of skim your poster and get the main points. For this reason, including a lot of visuals is helpful because people can just look at the visuals and immediately understand your results from looking at the visuals and even the context and background. If you have maps or photographs, those are really great to include a lot of visuals on your poster to make your poster engaging and interesting and very easy to understand. Flow is something you should think about as you imagine someone standing in front of your poster. Your poster should really tell a story. So this would be an example of a poster that imagine yourself walking up to this poster at a conference. Where would you even start? There's so much information here, and it's unclear which section you would start with and what section would come next. You can think of your poster as telling a story, and that story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, so I actually, what is written on my screen is impeded here by the software, and I can't remember what it says. What does that first bullet say? Can I slide this up?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Easy to navigate.
Oh, easy to navigate. Okay, right. That's right. Easy to navigate. So in this example that Clara was using, it's very obvious where you should start and which sections you should progress to from beginning to end. let's see here, I gotta go back to my poster. So you would just naturally, or maybe not naturally, but typically these posters should be read from left to right and from top to bottom. Okay, white space is also very important to make your poster inviting and easy to skim and look at. Again, let me go back to this poster. There's really not a lot of white space. And when I say white space, I just mean, can the poster breathe? Is it suffocating or is it breathable? So specifically, when you have elements such as text or a visual that's too close to the edges or too close to other elements, that's what I would describe as a poster that feels cramped. So here's an example of a box where it says the Iron Paradox in this box here at the top. You can see the text in that box feels cramped, like it can't breathe. So I would warn you away from that, and even putting text too close to the edge of the poster and putting elements too close to one another. So there should be enough space where it's easy to navigate and it feels like you're not overwhelmed by the amount of information. The same thing goes for text density. Again, imagine your person walking up to the poster. They're not going to be able to get through all of this text and stand there and read every word. Probably if somebody walked up to this poster, they would look at the figures because they're easy to look at. So the results section actually seems pretty reasonable for this poster, but it's very much too dense. And instead of these big blocks of text, I would suggest using bullets and very short phrases. You do not need to use complete sentences. In fact, you should not use complete sentences, just the briefest of phrases. Color scheme, I think that probably the biggest pitfall I see in posters and also other scientific materials is a problem relating to contrast. I don't know if you can even read it, but the box on the left has white type on a light background. That is a situation where you have low contrast and you can't read the text. On the right, you have a dark background with white text. The contrast is much better. So really be mindful of, including text that has a high contrast against the background and visuals that have a high contrast against the background. It's something that I see again and again that can really make your product impossible to read. So this would be an example of a poster with, I would say, poor contrast. Some parts are difficult to read. For example, this results section. It's not horrible, but you have a situation where there's not enough contrast between the text and the background. Thinking about color scheme, I would say choose just a few key colors and use those throughout your poster. This poster has too many colors in it, which makes it feel a little disorganized and difficult to follow. So what I would suggest is choosing a few colors along the lines of this poster. You could see every single heading has the same colors, this sort of green, light green color, and all the figures are using the same, three colors throughout all of the figures. So it's easy to keep track of. Colors can help you navigate a poster, and using consistent colors for all of your headings and consistent colors for all of your figures can be very helpful in allowing people to keep track of the elements in your poster. Again, simple is better. I've seen posters with only 3 colors in the entire poster, and it looks great. You can do a lot with just 3 colors. So this is an example of a poster that really, it does include a few different colors of blue, but it's basically all blues. The color scheme is very simple, and for that reason, it's very clean looking and very easy to navigate. You could also see there's a lot of contrast. You can see for each heading, background, objective, methods, results. It's a dark background with white type. And for the body of the poster, it's a white background with black type. So it's very high contrast. It makes it very easy to read. Okay, your poster should have a lot of visuals. There should be a good balance between visuals and text. Visuals make your poster interesting, they make your poster engaging, and importantly, they allow the viewer to really quickly understand information much more quickly than if you would have to read the words describing, for example, your results. I don't have this in the presentation, but I encourage you to use photographs. If you are using a photograph of people in your presentation, you need to be sure that you have permission from the people in the photograph to use their photo. I don't know if that's something that would be, that would be likely in a conference like this. But photographs are nice, figures are nice, maps are nice. Even one visual element I like in this particular presentation is the background section. You can see near the beginning of the background section, they have the components of the metabolic syndrome. So really, those are just words, but the words look much more interesting because there's kind of a design element. The words are presented in colored boxes, which make them stand out a little bit more, and they look much more interesting to the viewer because they have a little bit of design in them. Every visual should have a caption. Even maps, I think this is really important to really clearly explain. Again, when you think about the people walking up to your poster, it could be that you're talking with someone and giving them a tour of your poster, and someone else comes up and you're not able to really engage with that second person. They should be able to look at your poster and understand it without any kind of verbal tour. And for that reason, having captions on all your visuals is very helpful. We have prepared a template for you if you would like to use it. The template is for a 3 feet by 4 foot poster. Do you have certain size requirements for the posters?
90 centimeters wide.
Oh, centimeters, of course. Okay. So the size of the poster can be adjusted. I have prepared a template using PowerPoint. So, so the size would need to be adjusted to be 90 centimeters wide. You can go to the PREPS website in the For Authors section and click on Scientific Poster Resources. And this is a screenshot of the part of the website that you can use to download the template. And this is the template that we have prepared for anyone who is interested. Each section of the template is a description in these bulleted sections of what type of information should be included in that section. So with that, let me open it up to questions. I also say that we are very happy to take a look at any poster drafts if you would like to email them to us at PREPS. Do we have our email address here? Our email address is right here. And if you're interested in getting some feedback, I know that time is getting a little bit short, but we're more than happy to look at your poster draft and give you feedback before you go ahead and print that poster. But let me back up a little bit and ask if anyone has any questions. Okay, stop sharing so we can see everybody again. Hi.
Hey.
Hi again.
What about uses of images?
What kinds of images?
Yeah, I mean the graphs and the things that you come up with in your own research, obviously you can use. But if you have other things that are maybe descriptive of photos or things that you find that you want to use, how do you go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have some kind of medical image or some kind of photo that you'd want to use, an MRI, for example, you would need to make sure that you had permission to use that. Those kinds of images really bring a poster to life. I would recommend including images if you feel like, if you're certain that you have permission to use them and they feel relevant in telling the story of your research. I encourage you to use as many images as possible, add a descriptive caption. What kinds of images do you think that you might see in a presentation like this? I'm actually not sure. Could you give some examples from your experience in these types of conferences?
I think, like people may use like pictures, like for example, in a counseling setting, or like, people doing a focus group discussions or something, or maybe like, some cartoons of different contraceptive methods.
Yeah, I was thinking of the clinical setting as well. If you're talking about stigma, like clinics and how friendly they are, or discussion groups, that kind of thing. So yeah, photos that might be, put people in context.
Absolutely. I would just say, if possible, what I like to do is take my own pictures. That way I know I have permission to use it. That's not always possible. But also, when you're choosing your images or your photos, make sure there's enough contrast that is people will be able to really, recognize what's in the photo, and that it will be, really kind of a compelling visual that will, generate interest in your poster. Do you have any other tips? So you have much more experience in a specific area in these types of conferences. Would you like to share some of your wisdom and experience in this area? Yolanda Berhanu?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you were right on everything you were saying, and that the most important thing is keeping it simple. And I think the bulleted points is one of the really critical things to make it very easy for people to read them. And I find that when people are making posters, one of the things is to make sure that you do multiple drafts. So you do a draft and then read through it again and see what words you can remove, to try to keep simplifying it down to less words, and then let it sit and then look at it again and what words can I remove, to try to keep making it less words, because the less wordy, the easier it is going to be for somebody to go through and read your poster and select your poster to look at. So I usually try to keep looking at it over again and reducing the number of words. How can I say this phrase in one word instead of 4 words, and just try to keep shrinking it.
Yeah, I think that's a really a great piece of advice. I have also found, and I don't know if you've had this experience as well, when I'm really forcing myself to remove as many words as possible, I feel like it forces me to really distill my message, to really force myself to figure out what is the most important part of my message. Yeah. What is my message? And so I think that exercise both helps the audience really understand and quickly, easily understand your research, but it also forces you to really be disciplined and to really clarify what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, I would add actually to that point, when I've participated in poster sessions before, I think one of the helpful preparatory steps that I took was to think about a quick couple of sentences that describe my research just in like a really tight summary, very concise, that you're going to have a lot of traffic around your poster, hopefully, and you need to be able to communicate the basic ideas of your research in a really succinct way. So it's helpful, at least for me, to practice that a couple of times, and then people can ask you to give more detailed information if they want to spend more time at your poster. I think that's been a helpful strategy for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And also, just to add something else, it's really hard. I mean, I think Yolanda's strategy is absolutely great to really step away as much as you can and then try to come back with fresh eyes to revisit some of your language to try to streamline that. That said, it also can be helpful. I mean, we're happy to look at your poster, but even to ask a colleague to look. And oftentimes we become, to use a medical analogy, we become immune to our own work, and it's really hard to really look at it with fresh eyes. It can be challenging. So having another set of eyeballs on your project can be really helpful.
Yes, certainly all your co-investigators are great people to have looking at
course,
it.
Yeah, in fact,
so
they should.
That's a lot of eyes.
Yeah, but actually that's a really good point, is that you really should be sharing it with your co-investigators so they can see it and make sure everyone agrees on the final product. I'm going to make a note of that because that is a very important point. So thank you for saying that.
So this is based on my very very limited experience. Research is actually if you are actually writing a paper and then and then you're also thinking of submitting your abstract to a conference, sometimes especially trainees, you get too much attached to your results or to your figures and to your conceptual framework, and it's always very very hard to put what is important. So like you guys were saying, to be able to share with the other members of the team to actually pick out what seems very very important, because when you get too much attached, probably end up with a poster that we saw in the previous one. I really it was that stark contrast with all those metabolic pathways. You feel everything is important, and then probably because you're putting a few of the the product, you feel oh, I haven't shown I have done more. So that there is actually that fight inside of you. Okay, I'm not putting everything that's important. So having more eyes. And then the other process that also probably helps is even in the phase of the abstract submission, because there is there is a limited number of words that forces people to actually identify important points. But then I feel most of the posters, at least submitted by trainees, happen at a very later stage, when deadlines are approaching, so that's why probably some people end up just using a template and putting everything every text there. So it actually people need to give time in preparing the poster.
So start early.
Yeah, that's really those are some really important and key points. I think what you said first about sort of falling in love with your figures and not wanting to tear yourself away from them or to part with them. There's an American author, Ernest Hemingway, who has an expression for that. He says, "Kill your darlings." So you fall in love with your words, you fall in love with your figures, you have to kill them. You can't always keep everything that you love in your poster. And I think just the fact that he has that quote and he was talking about that experience really speaks to the fact that we all have those experiences of, really putting things together and then having trouble figuring out what to remove. And so it's a process, and everyone has to go through that process, and we can really help each other out. You can get insight on yourself by getting some distance, but also we can help each other. really figure out, what's the most important thing to keep and, what you could, keep in the refrigerator until the next presentation, or keep it on ice, keep it on keep it fresh for the next time.
The other minor point you mentioned about like not leaving figure, like, figure numbers or table numbers. I mean, I understand, but like, I think this is also very based on limited experiences. Now, like, people are, like some conferences are actually doing e-posters. And so they have like templates. So for those, you probably may need to put figures because that's actually probably how you actually upload it into the system. For e-posters, electronic posters, we had very limited, like, I remember from CUGH, and like other conferences are also doing it, like, where you'd have to label, like, maybe you may need, like, those figure numbers when you're uploading.
Okay, so that would be like a PDF poster that you would submit electronically, is that what you're saying?
It's a different experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so
similar but different, yeah.
Okay.
Because they're actually being presented, like, on monitors.
It's almost like a PowerPoint.
Yeah, like a PowerPoint monitors. But the way the system generates it is actually uploaded like into the system.
I see.
It's a
I'm
hybrid.
sorry, well, okay. Is that this conference?
No.
Okay,
No,
okay.
you don't have it here. This one, yeah.
So that's another thing to keep in mind for other conferences in the future. Is that there could be, it's not always you print out the poster and take it under your arm and carry it and set it up with thumbtacks.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more of this electronic kind of presentation on a screen.
They did that at ESOG as well. This year, Ethiopian Society of OBGYNs. They had six terminals, and so then one person was responsible in the morning session and one in the afternoon, and that's how they did it. And they just had 6 big screens up. So
and people gave presentations.
And people were standing in front of their posters to, but it wasn't like every 10 minutes like it was a CUGH. It was for the whole process.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there are some different formats being done, yeah.
So I know this is like a question. This is actually a question. So Clara was actually talking about, like, when you're presenting, thinking about, like, when you're thinking about the format or whatever you're going to be putting in the content of your poster, you also need to think about how you're going to present it. Like, so how, like, I know this is a very naive, like, very silly question to ask. I know different conferences have, like, different audience sizes. Like, some conferences are, like, in thousands, like some are like in hundreds. I know, so, and then the number of posters would be different. So in order to maximize, like, or like to attract audiences to your poster, like, when you're designing your poster, like how many minutes would you say, like, would be a reasonable amount of time for people to go through when you're actually thinking about the design of it?
Well, first of all, I typically suggest that when someone walks up to your poster, you give them a brief tour between 2 and 4 minutes of your poster. You can welcome them to your poster, and then you should have something prepared, very short, to introduce your work. And when you're giving your, what I call a tour, I would say that you point out the highlights on your poster. As you're talking, I would point to the different elements on your poster. Maybe you want to start with the background, give a little context, and describe the importance of the research. And then I would probably maybe say one thing about the methods, and then highlight maybe 2 results, and point to the poster as you're talking, if you're going to highlight a figure and maybe a table, and then maybe 1 or 2 takeaways. So that's what I would prepare, to the verbal tour as people walk up. If someone walks up while you're in the middle of the tour, I would just say simply nod to them, acknowledge them. They will start to look at the poster on their own and hang around. You could always circle back after you're done with your tour. I would say that typically people are not going to probably spend more than 5 minutes total, after your tour, looking at your poster. So you should really plan for that. And that's kind of a pretty short amount of time for someone to take in a lot of information. So again, that really just speaks to this sort of need for you to prepare your poster in a way that's very easy to navigate. A lot of visuals, very short bullets, keep it simple, so people are going to be able to really quickly understand what you're presenting. And do you have anything to add, Clara?
I don't. I think that was very thorough. I think less is more to begin with on that tour. And then often, I think the best conversations I've had at academic conferences are as a result of the questions that my audience member asked, right? So you're not really sure necessarily what the background of the viewer is. And so they may ask more pointed, specific questions that are the most interesting to them. So let them steer the conversation after you've given them the tour.
Yeah, and as I was listening to Clara talk, it kind of reminded me that, presenting a poster, probably even more so than presenting an oral presentation, it's probably the most interactive scientific communication format. So, use that to your advantage. Of course, you want to present information to your, visitors, but it's a great chance for you to, presumably this is research that you're just, coming up with and just developing, and it's not yet cast in stone in a scientific publication. The people who visit your poster probably have information that can be helpful to you in thinking more about your studies. They're going to have some key insights, and as Clara mentioned, the questions they ask may be very helpful for you into thinking more about your research. But also, you can ask them questions and get their feedback and insights that again are going to be helpful to you, and to really take advantage of this interaction that is really all about your research. It's like a spa. You're just getting lots of attention and lots of smart people coming to think with you about your work.
Mm.
Well, it looks like we're getting pretty close to 9. Is there any other questions? I'd be happy to entertain emails as well. If you would like to send an email and questions about your poster, you want to send your poster, or anything else, we're happy to talk with you or communicate with you.
Well, thank you so much, Ella and Clara.
Yeah. And we'll send
you.
the slides so you can distribute them. And the slides have our email address on it, so for follow-up.
Great.
Great. I hope everybody enjoys making their poster and enjoys networking with people at a poster session. And
yeah, I look forward to meeting you and seeing your poster.
yeah, this is wonderful. I know this will be really helpful to everybody.